Hello and welcome to episode number 195. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast. Nice to have you with us. In today's episode, we are going to take a look at a number of criteria that you can apply in order to select between Agile and Waterfall-based project management methodologies. And let me just say that the title of the presentation, Criteria for Selecting Agile over Waterfall, or Not, was intentionally selected and designed to be a bit controversial, but I promise you that what you will be seeing and hearing in this video will look at many facets and give you a better understanding of the matter at hand. But first, did you miss me? Or did you even notice that the PM podcast was unusually quiet last month? Well, allow me to extend my sincerest apologies to all of you for this period of silence, but unfortunately I was sick for about 2 weeks. We were flying back from Switzerland to our home here in California, and unfortunately I picked up a nasty bug on the plane, and I was starting to feel sick and weak about 2 days after we landed, and I was pretty much out of it for most of September. But now I'm back and will resume a normal schedule here on the podcast. But just in case you are wondering, on the customs forms at the border, after we landed, where they ask you, do you have anything to declare? I did not put down, I'm bringing in a nasty cold virus. So what I had was a smuggled and completely illegal cold. But back to the topic at hand. So why are we talking about selection criteria for Agile or for Waterfall? Well, it all has to do with our sister podcast, the PDU Podcast, on which I recently gave a presentation, a webinar on Agile titled An Overview of Agile Methods and Agile Project Management. And one of my customers over there, he gave me some excellent feedback after he had seen that webinar at mine. He said, I was never really a fan of Agile methods, but after having seen your presentation, it's about 2.5 hours long, by the way, he now thinks that it's time to reconsider his position. And since I've been able to sway him, I figured, hey, why not take a small portion of that webinar and also give it sort of as a taste to my subscribers here on the Project Management Podcast. Not necessarily as a taste of the PDU podcast, but as a taste of Agile. So you can consider this presentation here to be sort of an extension of the presentation that we did a few episodes ago about the Agile Manifesto. So here is what you hear, generally speaking, about Agile. Well, Agile is unfit for government projects. Or don't use Agile on a pilot project because it'll definitely go wrong. And then you also hear things like, well, Agile has a lack of structure and therefore it is unfit for small projects. And opposite of that, people say, well, Agile doesn't scale well, and you cannot really use Agile on large-scale projects. But no matter where you personally stand in this whole debate, the debate itself and the arguments that you will hear in the debate clearly shows that Agile is simply not a matter of one-size-fits-all approach. You cannot simply say that if a project meets these, say, 5 criteria, then go ahead and use an Agile project management methodology and approach on it. And that is why I want to clearly say at this point here, before we get started on the next slide, we're looking at the individual criteria, that when it comes to these criteria, do not think of them or use them as selectors. Instead, use them as indicators whether or not the project that you are currently considering for Agile might be suited to be used in an Agile environment. I'll repeat this again at the end of this whole thing when we have seen the various criteria, and I'll also show you exactly what I mean by use them as indicators. You'll see 2 examples of how we can do that. There are, of course, hundreds of criteria that you could use in order to decide whether or not to use Agile methods on your project. What I have done is I have selected the 12, well, shall we call them, most popular criteria, and we're going to take a look at them right now. And we start out with the project scope. In regards to the project scope, ask yourself, is the project scope dynamic or is the project scope fixed? In regards to a dynamic project scope, as an example here, we're talking about software development where new criteria are usually showing up in regular intervals and the customer changes his or her mind almost on an hourly basis. Or are we talking about a construction project, maybe building 20 houses in a development area? The scope is usually quite fixed, and we plan in the beginning what the houses that we're constructing are going to look like in the very end. If we're talking more about a dynamic scope, then, well, that indicates, well, you can go more towards Agile. If it's fixed, well, then we're leaning more towards a waterfall-based project management methodology. This is in the case in all of these examples that I have here. The first one versus the second one in the list here. So the left one is usually, the left word here is usually more leaning towards Agile, and the right word is more leaning towards waterfall-based methodologies that you can apply. Criteria number 2 here is the project type, and here we're talking about experimental projects versus delivery focused project. If you do not remember what we mean by an experimental project, then go back 99 episodes here on the Project Management Podcast and listen to episode 96 with Lee Fishman, where he talks about all his trials and tribulations in the experimental projects that he does or did at the time for his customers. So experimental projects there, they are very good when it comes to Agile because you're constantly changing pace, constantly changing your direction. Versus a delivery-based project, here we're talking, you have about projects where you have a product, a service, or a solution that you have to deliver, and we clearly already know what this is going to be. And talking about delivering something takes us right into the next 2 criteria, delivery and culture. In regards to delivery, the question is, how are we going to deliver this product, service, or result? Are we going to deliver this incrementally, or are we going to have a big bang delivery? I have 2 examples here, and they are not really good examples, trust me, but I was trying to not always use software development here. So I was thinking, incremental delivery. Let's think we have a mountain road that we have to build across the Alps somewhere, going from little village to little village, and we are building this in an incremental way. So first we're building the road to the first village, then we're building a road to the second village, to the third village, etc. And by doing this, we can always change our plans between the villages and go a different route as we are constructing this mountain road. However, if we want to build a bridge crossing a river, well, we have a beginning one side of the river, and then we have the other side of the river, a beginning and an end. We know exactly where the roads are going to come. Road ends on the south going side, and here's where the road ends on the north going side, and now we have to build a bridge exactly to those 2 points. There is no moving the bridge. So in regards to that, that would be a big bang delivery here. We build the bridge, we put it there, we're done. It's all delivered at once. Next, we have to talk about culture here. And when we talk about culture, is your customer going to be involved, or is your customer going to be passive in regards to taking part in the project. Because on Agile projects, a customer is really expected to give ongoing participation, give ongoing feedback as the project progresses and does all these increments. Versus on a waterfall-based project, I'm almost wanting to say that, well, we have lots of upfront planning, and then, dear customer, you can sit back and relax until we come back to you at the very end and show you what we have built. Of course, I mentioned this earlier, these are not selectors, they're more indicators, because let's take a look at this culture example here. Even if your customer is a passive customer, that could be overcome if you have somebody who is assigned as a customer representative. So let's say you have a business analyst on your project, and this business analyst then takes on the role of the involved customer representative, but the customer himself or herself is really a passive sponsor in the background of the project, handing over the responsibility for participation and feedback to the business analyst who knows the business inside and out. So there are always ways how you can overcome these criteria if they lead you more towards a waterfall-based methodology. Our next criteria is the team, the project team that is going to be performing on this project. Now, there are two areas that we need to focus on. First of all, we have to think about whether or not the team is going to be stable or whether it's going to be more of a fluctuating team. So can you assign team members pretty much for the complete duration of the project to this particular team, or are we going to have fluctuation? People are constantly coming and going. If you have a stable team, then if you look at the Tuckman model of forming, storming, norming, and performing, if you have a stable team, then, well, you go through this forming, storming, norming, and performing, and then you can really move forward with this team and deliver the project. However, if you have a fluctuation on your team, well, then you start with forming, you fluctuate, you go back to forming, you go back to forming, you go back to forming, and you will never, ever move into the performing stage here. Second question that you have to ask yourself, is the team co-located or is the team virtual? So is the team all in one side or is the team distributed around the globe? Again, this is never a yes or no situation. For instance, if you are just about to roll out Agile in your organization, then having a global team on your first project, on your pilot Agile project, it's probably going to doom the project. Not a good idea. But once you have experience in managing Agile projects and you have solid processes in place, then yes, of course, you can go ahead and go global with the team. Maturity is the key here. Our next criteria are the management, the internal management in your organization, as well as your customer, be it an internal customer or an external customer. In regards to management, you have to ask yourself, do we have a trusting management or do we have more of a controlling management? When it comes to your management, they usually have questions like, how can we promise the new features to our customers if we don't sit down in the beginning and plan this stuff? How can we then also track the progress of this? And when on earth is this project going to end if we don't have a huge plan? So many managers are really reluctant to give up the control that a project plan gives them. You know, the Gantt chart, the schedule, and they can really track the progress on this. And since management support is extremely important on the success of an Agile project, then the only thing that you can really do and tell these hesitating managers is, well, let's try it for a while. Let's look at what we can do. Let's create a track record and see how we can really perform using Agile projects, how on time we will be, what the delivery is going to be, and let's see where it takes us. And that takes us to the customer. On the customer side, you have to ask yourself, well, is my customer more of a chaotic customer, or is the customer more of an orderly customer? And I don't mean this in any way positive or negative. I simply mean in regards to chaotic. Does your customer like to go with the flow and see where it takes us? Or is your customer somebody who really needs a plan up front? The technological risk and the project size are our next two criteria. And in regards to the tech risk, well, go ahead and ask 10 people what they think, whether or not Agile is better if you have a high or a low tech risk, and you'll probably get 10 different answers. Some people say, oh yes, high tech risk, that works very well with Agile because we can change plans as we are moving along. And others again say, oh no, because we have these 30-day sprints in Agile, we really cannot, dilly-dally or try new stuff, because at the end of this sprint, we have to deliver something. So if we have a high technological risk, we're really risking that our sprint will not be able to deliver at the end. So take your pick on this one here. Which one is more leaning towards Agile or towards Waterfall? Your opinion on this one is just as good as mine here. In regards to size, again, small projects are generally said to be leaning more towards Agile versus the huge projects. And here we mean something like a small project in regards to a website versus huge, meaning really huge, a banking software. And that's simply because Agile, some people say, it doesn't scale all too well, even though there are some Agile methods out there that do scale up to project sizes of 800 people plus. And with that, we have already reached the last two criteria I'd like to talk about today. The first one is regulatory requirements, and the second one is the criticality of your project. In regards to regulatory requirements, well, it's a simple yes or no. Is your project in a regulated environment, or is it in a completely unregulated environment? Regulated environments are things like pharmaceuticals, banking, insurance, where you really have to follow the rules that are set up often by the government, versus here my example, podcasting, because 3 days ago I was telling myself, hey, this presentation here would be a fantastic presentation to put on the podcast, so why don't I insert this right now, produce it and get it out to my listeners? There's absolutely nobody that regulates me and tells me otherwise. And last but not least, let's also talk about the criticality. Not the criticality of the project, but the criticality of the features that you are building. So are we talking discretionary features, or are we talking loss of life features? And as an example for discretionary, billing, a billing system for your company, okay, nice to have, but nobody is going to die. Versus a healthcare system, well, there might be a chance that if something goes really wrong with the product that you are building, that people will lose their lives. So how critical is the product, the project that you are working on in regards to these two items? And now let me take you back to what I said before we started the journey through these 12 criteria. I said criteria are indicators and not selectors, or should at least be used as such. So if we have 5 criteria and 3 of these criteria, as here in this slide, are pointing towards yes, and only 2 of them point towards no, well, that doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. So you want a method to analyze where your project falls that isn't simply yes, no, agile or not. You want a method that gives you more of a scale, almost a feeling, if you wish, a gut feeling of where your project should actually fall. And for this, I have two examples of how you can do this. The first one you see here on the screen. This is called a radar diagram, which I took from the book Agile with Discipline by Barry Boehm and Richard Turner. Now, the idea is that the criteria are, just like on a radar screen on the airport, are these arms that go out from the center. And you, as the project manager, who has to select a project, you would then, for each of these criteria, here we're using 5, you would go in and you would put a dot onto the place where this particular project falls. The two examples that you see here in red, a military messaging project, and in green, the online drug store. And if you look at the orange arrow on the right side there, about 4 o'clock on the radar diagram, you can see that the arrow pointing inwards says projects that are closer to the center are more likely to be agile-friendly projects, whereas projects that are more towards the outside are more going to be leaning towards your traditional waterfall-based project management methodologies. And for our second example, I would like to extend my thanks to hostfrontier.com, where I found an Excel-based tool that allows you to select between agile and waterfall-based methodologies. And as you will see, it's extremely intuitive. We're going to switch over to Excel in just a second, and it really is an indicative system and not really a selective system. Here we are in the Excel tool from hostfrontier.com, and it's a bit too wide to fit onto the screen, so we're going to have to just divide this up into 2 sections here, left and right. And as you can see at the top, they have a few notes here. In particular, they say that the following questions are used as a quick guide to assess the potential fit for a project to adopt an agile methodology. Quite important here. So let's jump right into the tool because it's really quite intuitive. Of course, first we have 10 criteria right here on the left: incremental release, high commitment, automated testing, which we haven't looked at yet here, small team structure, single system, continuous integration development. So you can see they have other criteria that they have selected for this here. And then let me move over to the right a bit. Here we go. And now you can see the right half of the screen. And what they have here is they have these great sliders. And now what you do for each of the criteria, you move the slider over. And notice on the right hand side there, where the visual fit indicator is moving up and the number as well. So when I move the slider here, the indicator also points into one direction. And then note also down here how we have the overall indicator with even a recommendation here. And what happens is, as soon as I start moving these things over, it moves. Project is likely to be suited to an agile approach. But then we're moving these ones over here, and we are changing this back to consider a hybrid agile waterfall project, right? And it's really intuitive and really very well created, this Excel file here. So highly recommend it. And once again, you can download this at hostfrontier.com. Just click on the search engine that they have and look for Agile, and it is the first search result that comes back. In conclusion, if you are trying to decide whether or not a project may be performed in an agile environment or not, then you cannot simply take a cookie-cutter decision-making approach. You have to consider many criteria before you are deciding whether or not this is possible. And at the same time, if you are looking at your first agile project, then not every project is fit to be your first agile project. Here you have to put even more rigor into the selection process. And you, as the project manager, you have to be able to stand up and tell your customer and your management, no, this is simply not the right project for us because this is the first agile project that we're doing. So no, this would be a bad selection. However, when we come to the word no, then remember that any project, or at least parts thereof, may be fit for Agile. So if your selection says no, this project really is more of a waterfall-based project, then you can continue this sentence by saying, but you know what? There are some parts of the project which we can actually do Agile on. That's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. And have you considered one of our sister podcasts? If you are a project manager and you want to become a PMP, then the PM Prepcast will take you all the way to the exam. And if you have already passed your PMP exam, well, then you need PDUs, Professional Development Units. That's what the PDU podcast is for, delivering one great webinar to you every month, at least one PDU. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this question: how many project managers does it take to replace a light bulb? Answer: it takes 2. One of them to do it, and one of them to note that this would have been so much easier if the first project manager had only used agile methods instead. Until next time.